studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This is the Spit Sports Show. Guys, I don't know if I have ever been more excited for an episode of this show. We're going to do a bit of a new format today. This is the full episode version of the new Spit Sports Show. Each episode's going to be about 30 to 40 minutes, and then I'm going to start cutting the different segments into different clips so that I can get more content out for you guys, because sports are ramping up right now. We're getting out of this dry, dead area of golf and poker and a little bit of tennis to football, basketball, hockey, and all of the sports that you guys come here and love. I cannot wait for those seasons to get started, so I wanted to start right here. And speaking of sports seasons getting started soon, I want to start with the Vancouver Canucks, because just yesterday they made a trade that their fans immediately after they saw the news had one reaction, and then that quickly turned into another reaction, and then 3 hours later there was a whole other reaction. Canucks Twitter went crazy over the Vasily Podkolzin trade. Vasily, my apologies. Traded to, of all places, the Edmonton Oilers for a 4th round pick in 2025. Now, the reason why the reaction was so vulgar and just out there after this trade was completed, immediately after, is on its face, this trade doesn't make any sense for Vancouver, just looking at it from a casual point of view, because fans around here where I live have been excited about this guy since he was drafted 10th overall in 2019. Coming out, he looked a bit like the Chris Kreider archetype. What I mean by that is power forward play style with a scorer's touch. And I would argue Podkolzin's scoring touch coming out of Russia was probably a little bit more talented than Chris Kreider's coming out of, I think he went to college NCAA hockey. Regardless, Pods was a point per game in the World Juniors. He was more than a point per game in the Russian Development League. And in the time he played for the Vancouver Canucks in the minors and in the major leagues, he flashed a bunch. There were plenty of times where he would have a quick burst of speed or a play through the neutral zone where he would keep possession, where you'd be like, okay, that's why he was a top 10 pick in the draft. It's, but that's all they were. They were little flashes, they were spurts. And I find out, yesterday that he's been traded for a bag of pucks. And it's just like, well, this guy had something to him. Why are we trading him away for, listen, 4th round picks? There have been some really good ones in NHL history, but I think it's something like 96% of the time within the first 2 years, a 4th round pick will be out of the league. So it's not like they're exactly getting premium value for this prospect who clearly has high end talent. So at first, me and all my friends who are Canucks fans were super upset. But as I thought about this trade more and more, and I started thinking of logical reasons behind this trade from the Canucks front office perspective, because everyone is really quick to call the GMs stupid or over their heads, which authentically sometimes they are, but most of the time these are professional hockey general managers. These guys have been working their whole life in hockey operations. There is most of the time pretty sound and logical reasoning behind their decisions. Now, I don't always agree with it, but most of the time there is a train of thought that would lead you to make the decision that is easy enough to follow. So the reason why I think this trade took place is twofold. One reason explains why they traded Podkolzin in general. And the second reason explains why I think they traded him to, of all places, Edmonton, the team that sent them home last year and has been probably the biggest thorn in their sides, really ever since McDavid and Draisaitl started hitting their prime. So the reason he got traded, and this is going to sound like a cop out answer, but it's just what I believe, is he simply hasn't developed the way anyone in that organization thought he would. Now, he spent his whole career going up and down between Abbotsford, the Canucks' AHL team, and the main roster. And I hate to say it, but it's for really good reason. His best season with the Canucks was his first season with them. He had something along the lines of 40 points in 79 games, maybe 30. I should have gotten that stat. I apologize. But the reason for that was the Canucks were terrible. So you can take more chances sacrificing defense for offense when you're trying to catch up and down 2 goals. And Talkett was not there with his systems. Sorry, 26 points in 79 games was Podkolzin in his first year with the Canucks. So for those two reasons, Pods was able to play a lot more free, a lot more offensive minded. Whereas since then, he's been pretty invisible out on the ice, if I'm being authentic. It's 2022, 23, he had 39 games in the NHL. He scored 7 points. In 23, 24, he played 19 games and had 2 points. And even in the AHL, he's barely above a half point per game. So you get this guy who's not only supposed to enforce the play, but his other main job is scoring, and he hasn't done that. So, in my opinion, this is kind of the Canucks folding their hand. They probably don't think his trade value is going to improve significantly, if at all. So, you give him a new location, a fresh start, you get a draft pick out of it, and hopefully it doesn't come back to bite you, because that's why I want to explain the second reason. Because why would you trade him to Edmonton of all places? Like, you don't want to trade a guy with any kind of potential in your division, because you play that team 7 times a year, and you're going to see him all the time, and he's going to come back to haunt you. But the reason I think is, and I have no sourcing on this, this is not coming from anyone I know who knows agents or GMs, none of my contacts. This is me, period. I think he has some character issues. And the reason I say that is, again, why would you send a player with potential to your division rivals if it isn't to somewhat try to sabotage that culture? I don't know if it's a poor work ethic, poor attitude is probably more likely, but something like that could absolutely have an impact on the culture over there. Now, this could be totally wrong. He might come in humble, but it's like sending a mole trying to invade a country, except the mole doesn't really know he's a mole. He's just kind of there to mess things up and, just ruffle feathers a bit. Now, is Podkolzin that kind of guy? Again, I don't have sourcing. I don't know. He hasn't been in the league enough to really do a lot of media, and he doesn't really speak great English, so it's hard for me to get a read, and I don't know him personally. But Patrick Allvin, he's had some pretty good luck with these trades lately. He's a smart guy. I don't really love his draft history, but when it comes to making deals, he's usually on the upper hand. And I could be totally wrong. I could be. The Edmonton, maybe they were the only team who would be willing to give up a fourth for him. Or maybe they really went after him because they believe in him. I don't know. But I feel like they would take less from another team to not risk Pods potentially haunting them in their own division. Now, I know that they did it with Kuzmenko a couple months ago, but they didn't have a choice because they were trading to get Lindholm, who was on the Calgary Flames. There was no getting around that, really. And listen, I think Alvin's earned the benefit of the doubt. I think there's a lot more behind the scenes to this deal than meets the eye. And to be honest with you, I think this is kind of a nothing deal. I think you get a fourth, and you're trading away a guy who clearly has some high top end potential, but his floor, I don't even know if it's a floor. It's more of an abyss. Like, he's bad defensively, just straight up. I didn't mention this earlier because I wanted to be nice to the guy, but he's not a good defensive player. He has a lot of just mental errors where he doesn't cover the D quite as well as he could and isn't on the boards when trying to get a break. Just little stuff. So I think this is a little move that could have big impacts later on for the Oilers if they end up making a playoff run, maybe a bit of depth scoring. But other than that, I feel good about the trade from the Canucks' perspective. Now, I want to move on from the NHL just because with football season starting up, I really want to start getting into my Detroit Lions because I know more about that team than most people on planet Earth, and I have some thoughts. about how they're what their mojo is going into this year, and it's not exactly in the place I would ideally want it to be at all, really. So, a couple weeks or a week ago, the Lions had some very scary injury news. Gibbs had a hamstring issue. Ennis Rakestraw and Terrion Arnold, both their first and second round pick cornerbacks, had ankle and chest issues, respectively. But they dodged a bullet. All of them should be good to go for week one. Gibbs is probably the scariest one because hamstrings can really linger, and he had some issues with his hamstring last year. But if he's good for week one, you just kind of have to play football at the end of the day. So that's a slight concern, but it is nowhere close to the Lions' biggest worry this year. Their biggest worry is the wide receiver position. And I know their offense isn't a concern to the general public because it's been so good these last 2 years. But Josh Reynolds had 600 yards and 40 catches for this team last year, and he is gone without replacement. Now, Josh Reynolds is not exactly a household name, but he was definitely a household name in my household. It seemed like every 3rd and 6, he was just doing a dig route, getting inside, getting open. And he was a really nice compliment to St. Brown because St. Brown's a lot more shifty and slot type, whereas Reynolds is a pure outside receiver. Now, the hope for the Lions is Josh isn't replaced by a player they bring in, but by a player developing. Jameson Williams is obviously who I'm referring to here, the Lions' first round pick from 3 years ago. Now, all reports are from training camp that Williams has been fantastic. He's been making catches that he hasn't in years past. His route running has gotten crisper, and obviously he has 4.2, 4.3 speed. And he really needs to step up this year. But the issue is he doesn't only need to step up in his deep balls and his stretching the field and his 20-yard routes. He's got to catch some big 3rd and 9s like Josh Reynolds did. And that's a lot to ask for a guy who hasn't had to fill that role really at all in his career. Because at Alabama, Devontae Smith was that kind of guy, that 3rd and 9 receiver. And obviously at Alabama, every receiver is kind of a number one receiver. There's no big 3rd down possession receiver on the squad. A guy like Jawan Jennings for the 49ers, a guy like KJ Osborne for years with the Vikings, like guys that aren't household names, but just every time you look up, they're making a big catch. You know what I mean? And I think the Lions are going to be fine. And I loved what I saw from Isaiah Williams. He was an undrafted receiver out of Illinois. 5'10", but plays a lot bigger than that to my eye. And he could fill a role, but that's kind of a lottery ticket at the end of the day. You just don't know how he's going to develop in the next couple weeks here. Will he be ready for week one after being undrafted? Many guys have done it before, but it's very hard to do. And I loved how Sion Vaki, I think Sion is how you pronounce the first name. Apologize if it's not, but I loved how he looked in the preseason. But unfortunately, he plays a position and role that is already filled by the best guy at that position and role in the league. That pass catching, speed back is already filled by Jahmyr Gibbs. So if we were somehow able to put Vaki into a 3rd down slot position or even a little more out wide, that would be ideal. But that's a pretty out there idea because he played safety and running back in college. He doesn't really have any receiver experience. The Lions are hoping for lottery tickets to fill that wide receiver 3 position or rely on Donovan Peoples-Jones, who they brought in last year, who I would say is just under a wide receiver 3. He doesn't really separate the way a typical wide receiver 3 would, in my opinion. He can make some big catches and he's a big body, but just not quite Josh Reynolds good. Not on that level. But the thing is, and I want to get back to positive because obviously this is my team and I do have concerns about that offense. Just a little. But everything else on this roster, 1 to 53, is just amazing. For me, it's 49ers, Chiefs, Lions in their own tier as the clear top 3 rosters in the NFL. Ravens, I think, took a step back with their defensive losses and offensive lineman losses. I think they're going to take a bit of a step back. And I straight up don't believe in the Eagles because of their QB head coach relationship, and just the culture over there it doesn't seem good. The vibes are low. And is Jalen Hurts really an elite quarterback, or did he have one aberration year? That is still yet to be seen. I don't quite believe in the Eagles the way I do those other three teams. But at the end of the day, the Lions are going to be just fine. They have the best offensive coordinator in the world, top 5 wide receiver, 2 amazing running back tight end, all of that. I totally understand it. But if the Lions offense faces off against a 49ers or a Chiefs or Ravens or a Browns or any of these elite defenses, I would not be surprised if that hole of a wide receiver 3 starts to show up when you're behind the chains on down and distance. But we'll see how it goes. I think the Lions will be fantastic this year, but if there's one hole in the roster that's decently gaping, I think that one might show. And I want to stay in the NFL because the team that is just 3 hours down the road from me, the Seattle Seahawks, or as I like to call them this year, the Seattle Sleepers, because the Seahawks are flying under the radar more than they have since last year. To be honest with you, they really fly under the radar quite a bit. They're not exactly the Dallas Cowboys, but the reason the Seahawks are flying so under the radar is because their defense last year almost inexplicably just took a massive step back after what looked like it was going to be a fantastic defense going into the season. So the reason why is the rookies from 22, 23, Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas, they're 2 tackles. And then they drafted Tariq Woolen, Kobe Bryant, and Boy Mafi, who are all solid defensive players. And they had a fantastic rookie season, all of them. The Seahawks looked like they had one of the best young cores coming up, to be honest with you. They just didn't really have a quarterback set, but their defense looked young. Their offense is still exciting with Metcalf and Lockett, but none of them really took that sophomore step after their rookie season. They all just kind of stayed with the status quo. And the next year, besides drafting Jackson Smith and Jigba and Devon Witherspoon, apologies, their draft in 23 was pretty to very underwhelming. Even Jackson Smith and Jigba, I don't think Seahawks fans were exactly thrilled with his rookie season. Witherspoon's obviously one of the best young corners in the world, so no question there. But the one thing that we seemingly never realize until the playoffs are set is that there are at least 2 to 3 new playoff teams in each conference every single year. The turnover doesn't seem apparent when we're just looking at 1 through 53 on paper going into a year, because we just think the same teams that were good last year, they probably added some good players, so they're going to be good again this year. Shallow way of looking at it. It's just not how the NFL has worked for the past 100 years. And as I looked at the Seahawks roster coming into this training camp, I really started to believe that the Seahawks could be one of those new teams that squeak into the playoffs this year. So, a couple reasons why. First of all, Geno Smith is anywhere from the 14th to the 18th best quarterback in the NFL. There's really no doubt about that. But the thing is, he's surrounded by weapons that help prop him up and make him look like a top 10 quarterback for a lot of the time. Now, this is a lot to do with the quarterback chameleon theory, where there's tiers of quarterbacks, and one of them is the guy who is completely dependent on his surroundings. If he's in a great offense with great skill position people, he'll look great. If he's in a bad offense with he'll look terrible. Geno Smith is a quarterback chameleon. And Tyler Lockett is 31, but he's still got some juice to him. He never takes hits, so that body's more like it's 25. And DK and Jackson Smith and Jigba are straight up players in that offense. And Kenneth Walker's a solid running back. I hate to see the injuries he dealt with last year, but he should come back better. Fant is a super serviceable tight end. I loved him in Denver, just liked him just as much in Seattle. And I like most of their O-line. The tackles are solid, and they just drafted a guard in the 3rd round who looks like he's gonna start for them, which is a good sign. But before I get to the defense, what you're probably saying is, well, they had all of those weapons last year and they went 9-8 and they didn't make the playoffs. Well, first of all, 9-8 is pretty good. 9-8 will get you into the playoffs probably one every 2, 3 years, but they didn't last year just because the Rams were a wild card team and they were 10-7 in their own division. So it was just some bad luck, but they were still a solid team last year, which people just seem to forget. People look at the Seahawks' season last year as a failure, which it was, but that underestimates how talented the roster was and how well they played, even with being pretty decimated by injuries throughout the majority of the season. But the main reason that I believe they will be a playoff team this year is because of the other side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball. Now, Mike McDonald is a complete wild card. I will completely admit that. I've never seen him coach, and you never know how a head coach is going to head coach until he head coaches. But he was the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. And Seattle's issue on defense last year wasn't necessarily their coverage, it was the fact that they couldn't get to the passer at all. They were bottom 5 in quarterback pressure last year. So if anyone, if any coach is going to help dial up some pressure for a football team, it is Mike McDonald. Because if you watch that Ravens defense the past couple of years, they would have the most extravagant blitz packages. They would get pressure with 4 because of those extravagant blitz packages. And just overall, the quarterback never ever looked comfortable during their time playing the Ravens. Like, I remember when the Ravens played the Lions last year, and it was evident from the first drive, going up against the best offensive line in the NFL, the Ravens just were better prepared to apply pressure to Goff, and Goff folded. So when it comes to a head coach, I feel like there isn't a more perfect fit than a guy who's known for his defensive pressure schemes coming to a team whose biggest issue last year by a mile was putting pressure on the quarterback. They also drafted tackle Byron Murphy in the 1st round, which should help a bit with interior pressure. Overall, I just don't see why the Seahawks can't win 9, 10 games again this year. And will that be enough to make the playoffs? I think so, because the NFC, it's a little better this year than it was last year. I'll admit, on paper it is. But there are a bunch of teams that I just don't believe in. The entirety of the NFC East, I don't believe in this year. They're the Falcons, who I'm about to get to. Like, there are a couple of squads that I could absolutely see taking a fall, and Seahawks just maintaining the status quo, getting a little better, and getting into the playoffs this year. I think Seattle's a real sleeper, and I think their over-unders at 7.5. I would hammer that over. Absolutely hammer it. And speaking of unknown quantities, the Atlanta Falcons, ladies and gentlemen, they just signed Justin Simmons for $8 million, traded for Matthew Judon. It looks like the Falcons are really on the trail to making the playoffs and potentially winning a playoff game. And the reason everyone is super excited about the Falcons isn't because of their defensive moves or their defensive head coach, which I'll get to in a second, but it's because of their offense. And the fact that their quarterback play has been so destitute for the past 2 years that with a quarterback coming in like Kirk Cousins, who's a ball deliverer, clear, accurate passer, those weapons, the fans think, are only going to expand, get better, and Atlanta should have a very potent offense. And I understand why, but as you start actually looking at their skill positions as NFL players and what they've done throughout their careers, you start to think maybe the Atlanta Falcons are an idea based on college performance. Because on paper, their offense, it's just not as good as people think. Their offense on paper isn't nearly as good as the Vikings offense was throughout most of the years with Kirk Cousins besides last year. I don't think it's going to be nearly as potent as the Vikings offense was in 2020 or 2019. Now, I understand that Kyle Pitts is the highest drafted tight end in league history. Got it. Unbelievable talent coming out of Florida. But this isn't the NBA. Can't miss prospects, miss more than any other league in the world. And coming out of Florida, I was always a little skeptical on Kyle Pitts playing tight end, period, because he just doesn't look like he has the body for it. He looks like a wide receiver. So playing the slot middle and just different things, you need a really clever offensive coordinator, in my opinion, to unlock Kyle Pitts. And the Falcons just hired a defensive coach. Now, will their offensive coordinator figure out ways to get him the ball? We will see. But in the NFL, even with bad quarterback play, I haven't seen Kyle Pitts really flash. I haven't seen any crazy yak yards after the catch. I haven't really seen him separate. And that brings me to Drake London. Drake London is a better player than Kyle Pitts at the moment, and he's obviously a very good wide receiver. But Pro Football Focus ranks him as the 26th best in the league. And that's not based on his catches, his yards, his stats that are dependent on the quarterback. That's based on his separation, his route running, his catching, what he should have done every play, the grading system. And my grading system obviously isn't quite as precise as Pro Football Focus, but I would have him right around the same place, anywhere from that, I don't know, 30 to 22 spot as a wide receiver, which is really good. But when you're talking about Atlanta like they're going to be a lock for a top 5 offense, when your number 1 receiver is the 26th best in the league, these two things don't really add up. But they do have Bijan Robinson, and listen, I have nothing bad to say about Bijan Robinson, fantastic NFL player, and I think he might be, I think at the end of this season, he's going to be either the best or second best running back in the league consensually around the league circles, just behind McCaffrey. But McCaffrey's getting old. If he gets hurt, I think Robinson could take a spot. Anyways, fantastic player. But is he significantly better than prime Dalvin Cook, who Kirk Cousins played with? I don't know. I don't think so. He's definitely not the runner that Cook was. I think he's a better catcher of the football, but those two are kind of a wash. And Kirk's offenses with the Vikings, like I said, were always really good, but they weren't world beaters. And add on to all of that, the quarterback who's supposed to change life for this side of the ball is coming off the worst injury in sports. Now, more people are recovering from it and playing just fine after it than ever before because of modern medicine. But Kirk's 37 years old, coming off an Achilles injury. And if I have to dock Aaron Rodgers for that, I have to dock Kirk Cousins for it too. Now, I just don't know if this offense is going to be as explosive as everyone else does. I like their offensive line, but the skill pieces I think are straight up overrated. But I think their defense this year is extremely underrated. I like their pass rush. They have one of the best interior pass rushes there is. And I don't know what Raheem Morris is going to look like, but he was the defensive coordinator for the Rams last year. And I know it's one game, and I did watch a lot of Rams football, but the second half adjustments that he made in that playoff game versus the Lions, holding them to 3 points in the second half after the Lions were just running up and down the field on the Rams throughout the first, was incredibly impressive. So again, you never know how a head coach is going to head coach until he head coaches, but Raheem Morris has the archetype for sure to be a great defensive head coach. And I think with the personnel they're bringing in, the Falcons front office thinks that too, because Justin Simmons and Judon are dogs. And I think they're going to be able to play their role exceptionally well paired alongside that pass rush. Add Judon to that pass rush. It's going to be issues for the quarterbacks, especially in that division with so many weak offensive lines. And I want to finish this. First of all, if you've made it to this far in the video, like fully, thank you so much. I can't put into words how much I appreciate the fact that there are some people in this world who enjoy hearing me talk about sports in my room to the point where they're where they'll spend some time of their life watching. Like, I don't know. It's just a weird feeling to me. So if you've made it this far, like from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. But I want to finish with Kevin Durant and this Dennis Schroeder situation because after the US took home gold, Kevin Durant sent out a picture of the US celebrating with their medals with the caption straight IQ and sorry, entertainment and IQ. So he sent a tweet trolling Dennis Schroeder, who he previously made a comment saying FIBA basketball is about straight IQ and the NBA is about entertainment value. So Kevin Durant was clearly trolling him. And Schroeder took issue with this on a podcast yesterday. He said that is just being weak. You are that type of star and you have to say something to a person like me. And that quote is about his subtle shot, but it's more about all encompassing what Kevin Durant does on social media, which is he is the most active Twitter fingers of any superstar athlete we've ever seen in our times. He's basically saying Kevin Durant should be above that kind of pettiness and what he does on a day to day basis, which Schroeder's obviously right. I mean, he is above it. He just won his third gold medal in the Olympics. He probably should be above, taking a subtle shot at an NBA role player who couldn't shine his shoes. And he does this a lot. He always seems to take the most insignificant things to heart. And then after he proves these insignificant things wrong, he takes a subtle shot instead of just outright saying, I told you. He's a passive aggressive kind of guy. And Durant is well known for just responding to randos and debating them about basketball. But thing is, everyone criticizes him for this, and it's a big part of his thin-skinned snake reputation, which I think the snake has gone down, but thin-skinned for sure. But I love Kevin Durant off the floor. Love everything about him. First of all, I believe Schroeder believes his social media habits are a sign of weakness and insecurity. I see it as the total opposite. I see it as a sign of total security. And I think it's from a place of Kevin Durant loves basketball. Now, I know that NBA players, listen, if you're an NBA player, you probably love basketball, but they don't. They don't. Like, I've seen it on JJ Redick's podcast a million times. NBA players talking about how there are 80% of the players in the league that don't love the game. They love what comes with the game. Kevin Durant loves basketball. There are videos of him in the club, practicing his jump shot form. He's a workout warrior instead of lifting. Like, the difference between him and LeBron, he said in an interview, was LeBron is in the gym lifting weights, whereas I'm in the gym shooting. He's the most skilled basketball player maybe ever. It's definitely at that height, and you have to love basketball to develop that kind of skill. And all of his tweets are about basketball or how basketball is covered or how the media treats basketball players. I think he just enjoys talking about the game. He enjoys going back and forth with people about the sport he loves, just like any other fan would. And I totally understand that because I love that too. And I don't know, obviously, what my life is going to look like in 10 years, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if, I'm on some network somewhere and I'm still, debating Fred 305 about LeBron's the GOAT over Jordan or, Steph Curry's a top 10 player. Just little stuff because it's just so much fun debating sports because it's not like debating politics. And this kind of goes back to the video that I published a week ago. It's so innocent. You can debate sports and not offend anybody and just have a fun conversation about your opinions and takes on a subject without any repercussion. And I think Kevin Durant loves that. And I love it. So I totally understand where he's coming from. He just wants to talk about basketball. And listen, if someone takes a shot at him, he'll take a little shot back and whatever. He's single, go home, play some video games, maybe smoke a little weed. That's what he does. I don't know. Like, he just enjoys his life, really, and doesn't care what anyone thinks about it. And I really, really respect that. I think Kevin Durant, Kevin Durant's one of my favorite guys off the court in the world, to be honest. I love LeBron. He's probably my number one, but close second. It's not weakness. It's not weakness. He doesn't see it. He just sees it as a chance to talk and debate basketball whenever he wants. That's what Twitter is for him. And more power to him. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is by far the longest episode I've ever recorded, but I had a lot of fun doing it. I think I'm going to do more episodes in this format. Again, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. We just hit over 350 subscribers on this channel. Big stuff happening. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed. Please leave a comment. I am small enough as to where I can respond to all comments, and as I just mentioned, I love doing it. So drop something in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of the video, your takes on what I said, and as always, I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.